Welcome back. I'm Austin Westfall. You've been looking at Gaza, where we saw an explosion moments ago. We didn't show it live on air. It was while we were talking with Hal. But it seems that the IDF is busy in Gaza at this hour. There's a lot to discuss, as always, with the Israel-Hamas War, and Dr. Alon Burstein is standing by. We're going to talk a lot about Gaza today, Alon. As always, it's good to see you. Let's keep looking at this live image. I'm curious if we'll see any more activity. Let's start with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He did say on Monday that Israel would control all of the Gaza Strip and prevent Hamas from looting aid. The Prime Minister said all of this as the IDF started a large-scale operation called Gideon's Chariot. Netanyahu is saying that this operation will amount to his country essentially taking over Gaza. How much of Gaza alone do they already control, and what challenges will they face to take the rest?
It's good to see you, Austin. It's really hard to say because it depends on what we mean by control. The IDF presence throughout the Gaza Strip is in a couple of very, very strategic places along the Gaza border. I mean, you can see the map here. So the IDF has taken over like a buffer zone throughout the entire border area. It has also effectively evacuated a fifth of the Gaza Strip across the Marag corridor and down below. The entire area of Rafah has also into itself been evacuated of Palestinians, and the IDF, according to at least reports, plans on relocating Palestinians to that southern region. So some reports are saying that the IDF is effectively in control of 40% of the Gaza Strip. We tally up the buffer zones, the areas in the north, and that area in Rafah. However, there's also a lot of other areas that have been declared no man's land, even though the IDF does not control them. So this area along the Netzarim corridor, the IDF has done a lot of flattening operations, and Palestinians aren't allowed to get anywhere near there. There's also now been evacuation orders of the entire region of Han Yunis. That's this entire largest city in the Gaza Strip. The population has also been ordered to evacuate into the Al-Mawasi region. So to some extent, the UN is saying that 80% of the Gaza Strip is either under IDF control or under IDF evacuation orders. The IDF is saying that it controls some 30 to 40%. What is actually happening there is the more the IDF is right now intensifying its military operations, specifically in northern Gaza and in Han Yunis, the more Palestinians are fleeing those different areas. So the situation is changing by the hour. You say you saw the explosion live on camera. I'm not surprised. The IDF said that before it launched this operation on Sunday, the week before that, they carried out over 670 airstrikes throughout the entire Gaza Strip. So I'm not surprised if you're just pointing a camera at Gaza, you'll be seeing this activity.
If you could go more in depth and expand on that, what have we seen in recent days in Gaza, and why has it been making allies take a second look at what's happening there?
So I think we have to sort of take a broader view of what the IDF said that it is planning. Up until now, the war is now, a year and a half, couple of months. We're going to be looking at 2 years. What we've had already is ever since October 8th, after the October 7th attack, ever since October 8th, the IDF took over broadly all of the Gaza Strip except for the central parts. It spent the first couple of months taking over the entire northern parts of the Gaza Strip and the Gaza City, then about 6 months taking over Han Yunis, then taking over Rafah. Each time, it said that it defeated Hamas's presence there and then it withdrew. And the result is Hamas simply rebuilt. Now, about a week and a half ago, the IDF said that it is developing a new plan ordered by the Israeli government called Gideon's Chariots. And this time, what the IDF wants to do is to systematically take over areas and not evacuate them, not withdraw from them. The Palestinians will be evacuated from them, but the IDF will not then withdraw and have Hamas rebuild. Instead, the IDF is going to set up a permanent presence in those areas until, and here there's no real answer, until what? Until Hamas is defeated, until Hamas disarms, until the hostages come home, until the Hamas leadership goes into exile, until Trump's plan to remove all Palestinians from Gaza. The IDF doesn't really give an answer to that. And that leads really to the second part of your question: why is the world getting up in arms now? Up until now, in the last several months, we've had a complete blockade of all humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. The situation there has gotten very dire. There is mass hunger that is being reported. And everyone was sort of waiting for where are things going to go? Are the sides going to then come to a deal that'll somehow allow humanitarian aid in, secure the release of the remaining hostages? There's still at least 20 live hostages held in the Gaza Strip for coming on, a year and a half, 2 years. Are we going towards a deal, or are we going towards escalation? And really, given the way U.S. President Trump has come in and he compelled Israel and Hamas to go to a deal in January, he then secured the release of Idan Alexander. He then was making a lot of statements about turning towards a trajectory of negotiations. I think the world was sort of looking to that direction to be developed, and Israel seemingly just went the other way. And I say just went the other way. Obviously, Hamas is also a party here, and Hamas is holding hostages and is also not willing to be more flexible towards Israel's side. Both sides are refusing. But in terms of what the world is seeing, it is seeing Israel all of a sudden saying, okay, enough's enough. I'm now flipping a switch. I am going for a very intensive escalation. And really, a lot of the questions are being asked are, but for what? To what end goal? If your goal is to release the hostages, well, then Trump's deal probably is a better way to do that. If your goal is to defeat Hamas, well, you've failed to do that for a while. I mean, these are things that different countries in the world are saying. We can support Israel's role what it wants to do in Gaza, but it has to present some end game. And this military operation is very, very expansive, but doesn't really say what it's leading up to.
This kind of goes back to the first question. Let's say Israel does essentially take over Gaza, as Netanyahu says. Is there any clarity on what that means for Palestinians and for Hamas?
So for Hamas, the aspiration is to have, right, we've talked about this many times, this total victory. And what does that mean? No one really knows. A couple of times when we're talking about Hezbollah, I said, at the end of the day, you're going to have some deal. It doesn't have to be with the terror group. It can also be with another entity. But bottom line, unless you're going to have every one of your soldiers in every single street fighting an endless war, you're not going to actually defeat a terror group, because all it takes is one person to get up one day and fire one rocket that is still there. So there has to be some sort of political solution. Ultimately, that solution right now, no one is seeing what Israel is thinking in terms of that solution. Israel is saying that it wants to defeat Hamas. Now it started talking about possibly just disarming, Hamas handing over its weaponry. Maybe that would be something that Israel would accept. Israel's then also talked about possible exile of Hamas leadership. For Hamas, as far as Israel's concerned, as long as it exists, Israel has a reason to keep fighting in order to defeat it. What does it actually mean, though? We don't know what that means in practical terms. The bigger question that you asked really is, what does this mean for the Palestinians? And that is really one of the bigger questions that we need to consider, because originally, when the war started, Israel was calling upon Palestinians to evacuate from place to place in order to keep them out of harm's way as the fighting was going to continue. And then, in theory, they would be allowed back one day, as they did during this current truce. They were all of a sudden allowed back to northern Gaza in January for the first time in over a year. However, now there is a much bigger question mark around their future, because Trump has also thrown out into the air, in that famous press conference in February, the relocating of all Palestinians out of Gaza. There was a report last week that the Trump administration has been negotiating with Libya to possibly take 1 million Palestinians into Libya. And one of the things I said when that press conference happened is, this may be one of those things that Trump just says and then isn't taken seriously, but it's going to be taken seriously in Israel. And Israel has run with the plan. Israel has set up an official government administration that is the administration for the quote-unquote willful immigration of Palestinians out of Gaza. Part of the IDF's plan, Gideon's Chariots, is to relocate the vast majority, some 2 million Palestinians, into the southern parts of Gaza Strip, into the Rafah area. And it explicitly says in the plans of the military that this is in order to relocate the population to a more convenient location. And then the political elements within Israel have said in order to possibly hasten their emigration out of Gaza. Because again, Rafah is near the border with Egypt. It's access to the sea. So this is all possibly with the, at least not very hidden implication that this could be as part of a plan to orchestrate some sort of mass immigration, ethnic cleansing, exodus, whatever you want to call it, out of the Gaza Strip. That is, never mind the legal ramifications or moral ramifications, that is problematic when it comes to what is the Palestinian population supposed to think. On the one hand, the world is sort of waiting for the population to rise up against Hamas and say, we don't want this anymore. On the other hand, they're also being promised sort of, when Israel wins, you might all get deported. So that raises a lot more concerns also for the population, not just in terms of what might be their future, but who should they even be hoping for in the current conflict to resolve the situation in a way that, on the one hand, they stop being caught in crossfire. On the other hand, they're also not facing then possible deportation.
The other crushing angle to Gaza right now is the aid situation, Alon. The UN says no aid has been distributed in Gaza, despite aid trucks starting to cross the border after an 11-week blockade. The BBC says 93 trucks entered Gaza on Tuesday, carrying aid, including flour, baby food, medical equipment, pharmaceutical drugs. But the UN said despite trucks reaching the Palestinian side of the Kerem Shalom crossing, no aid has been distributed so far. Alon, do we know why aid is past the crossing but not being distributed?
So everyone's raising a lot of speculations. Let's start with the numbers, right? During the truce, it was 500 to 600 aid trucks coming in per day. Now there's been no aid coming in for 2 months. So the UN is, first of all, screaming that the number of trucks that are coming in is not nearly enough for even the bare minimum of the population. Then there's the question of where is that aid going? In Israel, the constant trope is that the aid is going to be stolen by Hamas and is then used to finance Hamas activities. And that's why Israel was reluctant to allow aid in. There's a lot of evidence that a lot of the aid was stolen by Hamas. The UN says yes, but not all of it, and some of it does get to the population. So now with this report of the UN that aid has not reached the distribution sites, already we're having people building narratives around this. In Israel, there are already people that are saying, see, aid went in and Hamas just stole it. That's why it didn't get to the distribution sites. In turn, the United Nations said, no, aid went in, but because of the massive fighting that is going on in Han Yunis, Kerem Shalom is in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. And Han Yunis is in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. The mass amount of violence right now in the Gaza Strip is going on in Han Yunis. Here, Kerem Shalom crossing is around here, and this is Han Yunis, this is Rafah. All told, it is an area that right now the roads are bombed out. It is very difficult for aid trucks to get to the distribution sites, primarily the central parts of the Gaza Strip and the northern parts. So the United Nations is saying that as a result of the war and the ongoing fighting and the blocked roads and the no-go zones, no aid can come in. And really what the UN is saying, the main grievance here, is that Israel's only allowing aid through the southern crossing right now and not opening the northern crossings on Erez or in another crossing that Israel previously opened over here, so that aid can go directly into the other areas of the Gaza Strip. So there's different narratives about what is the reason that aid isn't coming in, and Israel saying, well, Hamas probably stole it. The UN is saying, no, the roads are actually blocked by IDF activity. We don't know the exact truth at this point. What we do know is that aid has actually not reached the population yet. I will say, though, that because of the small amount of aid that has come in and the fact that this was done very hastily, it was seemingly as a result of U.S. pressure on Israel. All of a sudden, yesterday, Netanyahu came to cabinet and refused to have a vote because he thought that they would vote against it and just announced aid would come in. All of a sudden, today, aid is coming in. It's also possible that this will get better in the next 2 or 3 days. We've seen this in the past, that when all of a sudden Israel sort of forced to open crossings and aid comes in, there's no logistical preparation on the other side to find out which roads can lead aid to the right places, to secure areas in coordination with the IDF. It all happens too fast. So I am expecting that probably in the next couple of days, we will see the aid routes becoming more efficient. But right now, not yet.
Something we don't talk about often is the West Bank alone. What's been going on in the West Bank? What do we not talk about that happens in the West Bank? And I guess if you were to catch the audience up, I don't know how long it's been since you and I have discussed the West Bank, but how would you describe the past half a year there?
It's a great question because this is really another arena that's sort of always on a low boil. The West Bank is, I'm sorry, that's this map. Out this side. The West Bank is this area over here. And while it is all marked in green here, it actually is under 3 different administrations. There's Israeli direct occupation. There is the Palestinian Authority that controls certain areas in the main Palestinian towns. And then there's what's known as Area B, which is really just a Wild West. It's an area that's a mixed administration between Israeli military and Palestinian administration. The result is that a lot of these areas are really in a Wild West situation where violence can just sort of run wild from both sides. In the West Bank, since the war began, we have seen a mass escalation of violence, a lot of Palestinian terror attacks against Israeli civilians and settlers and IDF soldiers in the West Bank, and a lot of settler terror attacks against Palestinians. We've seen a very big escalation on both sides. That came in waves over the last year and a half. In the last half year, we have seen the same thing. Every month or so, there is another wave of escalation. Often what happens is there is a Palestinian attack against a settler. As a result, settlers organize a raid and often torch several parts of Palestinian villages. This leads to spiral and escalation, and then that dies down. A week or two later, that starts again. So that's really been the situation. What has been, though, a very big development in the West Bank over the last 6 months has been in the political arena on both sides. In the Palestinian Authority, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has named a deputy. He named Hussein al-Sheikh to be the deputy of the chairman, and that position never existed. And that's very important because naming a deputy in that sense is pretty much signaling who is going to be my successor. Mahmoud Abbas is quite old, he's not in good health, and that to some extent may prevent complete lawlessness and almost a breakdown to civil war if and when he dies or leaves office. That happened in the last month or so. So that's a political development. The Palestinian Authority may be trying to reach some stability. Meanwhile, on the Israeli side, there is a constant attempt by the Israeli government, specifically spearheaded by the more hawkish elements, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, but Smotrich is really the main one, to try and expand settlement activity in the West Bank, both in the interests of simply expanding settlements, but also in the interests of ensuring that Palestinians cannot have their sort of territorial connections and stopping the creation of a Palestinian state. Those plans have really expedited over the last 6 months as a result of a lot of different deals within government. It's a little complicated, relates to internal Israeli politics, deals between Smotrich and Netanyahu. But for example, in this area, it's known as E1, between Jerusalem and the different Israeli settlers here, there's been a massive expansion of the Israeli settlements and administration in that area. And that specifically is meant in order to stop Palestinians from being able to build connections of roads and towns in this area and almost sever the West Bank in two. All that's a lot of technical details, I know, but in principle, why that's important is because, like I said, the West Bank is always on a slow burn. It's always on a situation where each side is waiting to light a fuse. And while there's been nothing almost out of the ordinary in terms of the ongoing violence between Palestinians, settlers, and the Israeli military over the last 6 months, the political developments that are happening are pouring more and more gasoline onto this slow burning fire that very likely at one point or another will erupt. So nothing major at this point in terms of like an explosion of violence, but we are seeing signs that things could get unstable very fast.
The always informative Dr. Alon Burstein joining us. Gotta say, man, the addition of the maps has been a game changer. He uploads his own Middle East updates on his personal YouTube channel. Please go give him a subscribe. It's a great channel. Alon, as always, great to see you. Have a good night.